scramble.
Ding, 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 ding,
Yeah,
ding,
hello.
ding. I'm running to my Spitfire.
James is running to his Spitfire. Here we are at the Imperial War Museum again. James and I are joined by John Delaney, head of the
Second World War and mid-20th century conflict.
1929 to 1949.
Thank you.
And slap, fat, bang in the middle of 1929 to 1949 is the Supermarine Spitfire. And we're up on this is the third floor from the basement, looking down onto this, to Mark 5.
To Mark 1. Mark 1A.
To Mark 1A.
Right. And I have to say,
it's in great. It's not.
Well, there is a story.
Of course, I hope there's a story because Mark 1. You expect a Mark 1A to be in brown and green, don't you?
Yes.
This is in brown and grey. RAF grey.
Yeah. It's in the colour scheme. It was in when it was at the OTU. It flew at in 1944.
Right.
Because it ceased frontline service and then went into service to train pilots.
Yeah.
And this is its original livery. So we've not repainted it. This is how it came out of packing cases, as was 1944.
Wow.
And I've got to say, this is my favourite Spitfire in the entire planet, because this is a 609 Squadron Battle of Britain Spitfire. And it has all sorts of... That squadron has all sorts of weird links for me, because when I suddenly got my Second World War obsession, which had been lying very dormant since the age of about 11 to 27, 28... I went up to Duxford for the Flying Legends show, having seen a Spitfire fly over a cricket match the previous weekend.
Yep.
And that was my Damascene moment. And I went up to Duxford, and there were loads and loads of second-hand bookshops. And the first book I bought was Spitfire Pilot by David Crook, who happened to be in 609 Squadron, which is the West Riding Auxiliary Squadron from up in Yorkshire way.
Yeah.
They were based at Middle Wallop during the Battle of Britain. And Middle Wallop is locally to me down in Wiltshire. Is my closest fighter command station. And the first bit of writing I ever did about the Second World War was not non-fiction, it was actually fiction. A novel set to the backdrop of the Battle of Britain. And I did lots and lots of research and talking to pilots and stuff, including reading David Crook's book, which I'd bought at Duxford that weekend. And I based my fictional squadron in the novel at Middle Wallop. And here we are. And this was flown by Noel Agazarian, who was at Oxford with Leonard Cheshire, who we were talking about the other day, and also Richard Hillary, who wrote the great contemporary account, The Last Enemy, who was so badly burned in the Battle of Britain. So lots of links there. And I ended up sort of writing about 609 Squadron, particularly when I did my Battle of Britain book, which you're going to be reading. And one of the pilots in this was John Dundas, and I got to know Cocky Dundas's widow, Robin. Right. And Cocky flew, I think, with 616 Squadron, and his older brother John flew with 609. And John was, Robin lent me all his old letters, his wartime letters, and he had a kind of sort of weird affair with an older actress who was in her 40s, and he was only sort of 22, 23 at the time. And he had sort of aspirations to be a writer and a journalist and all sorts of stuff. And he was a rather amazing guy, John Dundas. He was clever and witty and charming, and everyone loved him. And he was absolutely one of the team heroes in 609 Squadron. Everyone absolutely loved him. And he shot down Helmut Wick, who was one of the great first Luftwaffe fighter races, and was promptly shot down himself a matter of seconds later. So he said, I think I've got him on the radio, and literally 2 seconds later he was dead. And he was plunging down into the Solent just off the Isle of Wight, and that was the end of him. And I remember finishing writing that book, which was an absolute epic undertaking. And coming and standing up here and looking down into that cockpit, and I just had this weird moment where I could just see him in that cockpit.
Well, he did fly that aircraft occasionally.
Yeah, I know he did.
When it was taken out of service.
And I was thinking, God, this is it.
So how did this end up here? Was this a Gate Guardian for a bit and all that?
No, it wasn't. It's unusual in that before the end of the First World War, there was a realisation that there would be a need for a collection of commemorative items to represent what had happened in the First World War. That didn't really happen with the Second World War, except in one or two instances, and the RAF had identified this aircraft to go to a museum in 1944, even before the war had finished.
Well, so well before the war, the plan was to have it have it in a collection.
Have it in some sort of collection, not necessarily here because that wasn't obviously known about at the time in terms of our ability to show it, but it was packed up carefully, crated after its service at the OTU, and then it came to us in 1946.
Right. So it's been part of the collection.
Yeah, ever since 1946.
And on display that entire time.
Not always suspended like this. Sometimes on the ground. Many years ago, it was suspended in a much more ad hoc fashion than it is now.
Yeah.
But it's always been here. Yeah.
But I noticed there isn't a drip tray.
We've done our very, very, very best to drain all the fluids out of it.
Because when you other collections, you go like Duxford, for instance, all the aircraft, there's a drip tray under the crucial part where there's
what we've done with
oil.
For instance, with the engine systems, we've waxed it inside and out so that it's not going to. No fluids are going to run through the system, but the wax oil and the waxing we've done to it has preserved all of the system as is.
So there's still an engine in there?
Oh, yeah, it's all
so
in
this
there.
is oh, right. So this is a completely as-was item, but it's been been
frozen,
sealed and frozen.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, no offence, John, it could do a little dust, couldn't it?
It could do now, actually. Yes, we'll need to get a cherry picker in and get the cherry picker up to this floor and dust it down.
And Alan, you can see those two struts. So there's two lines going across the wing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of the problems they had was they were, when they were diving so fast sometimes.
So they're reinforcements.
They're reinforcements, exactly.
Which then go into the wing properly in later marks.
Exactly.
Because after all, the tail's still fabric on this, isn't it?
No.
Is it not?
It's a 1A.
Just on the rudder.
Yeah, there is still fabric in the.
Yes,
still fabric in the airframe.
Yes.
Yeah,
just on the edge.
Which later marks and the ailerons are fabric as well, aren't they?
Yes, fabric-covered ailerons.
Yes, but that all gets sort of weeded out as the Spitfire sort of gets heavier, and you get heavy metal versions later on with a much bigger engine and more cannon and the Griffin and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but it just looks brilliant, doesn't it? You can see it as it should be, kind of a bit battered, not kind of.
Absolutely.
Not too pristine,
We don't want to make them look pristine because they wouldn't have looked. This is not a good example because this is as it was when it came out of the crate, as it were. Yeah. But with any other restoration that we've worked on over the years, we're very careful not to make it look pristine because they didn't look like that.
Well, because after all, where the pilot's stepping on the wing to step into the cockpit, eventually you'd have the metalwork would be showing, the paint would be scuffed away, there'd be oil spill, there'd be fuel spoilage, exhaust burn and all that sort of thing.
You'll have battle damage patches of different colours all over it. It'd look, nothing like a production line. It's just come off the end of a production line.
Was this aircraft ever damaged or hit?
It was. Well, it was twice. The time it was taken out of 609 service, it was being flown by John Dundas.
Right.
He was attacked by an ME-1. I think he'd just shot down an ME-110, and 109 came in and badly damaged him. He was able to land and get out okay, but that was the point at which this left 609 squadron service because it was too badly damaged. It had to go off for maintenance unit repairs, big deep repairs. And it didn't come back to 609. It then went to an OTU. So the last operational combat sortie, this was flown by John Dundas.
Amazing. So that's it's a very, very significant aircraft. It really is. And interesting, Cocky, his brother, who first flew operationally at Dunkirk, survived the Battle of Britain, was shot down and had to bail out. Later became the youngest group captain in the RAF at 23.
What?
As a commander of a fighter bomber unit in Italy. And he wrote a really, really good memoir actually called I think Flying Star, if I remember rightly. And it's very good. And he later went on to become the CEO of Thames TV.
Really?
Yeah, he was quite a player. Wow. Very, very tall. Both of them were very tall.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful photo of the two brothers together in their RAF kit with their DFC ribbon on their breast pockets and stuff. And
then below the Spitfire, we look over the shoulder, as it were. We've the V1.
That's right. Yeah.
And again, how many V1s are there left? Because after all, it's not like it was not like they were built to last.
No, exactly. Well, unlike this, yes, exactly. Once they'd done their job, there was nothing of it left. Well, the Allies, of course, got to the production lines.
The Dora camp,
in Dora camp, in the underground mine there.
Have you been there, James?
No, I never have.
Been there?
I've not been there. I've seen photographs of the inside.
Very, very strange.
And
place.
a lot of these were pulled off the production line in various states of completion, and were taken back. This one came back to Farnborough for testing at RA, but other ones went to the States and were test flown. And
wooden wings, look.
Yeah. So this was a Farnborough test bed unit that was captured right at the end of the war, which is why it's complete and why it's like it is.
At Cosford, there's a V2 that's in the black and white colour scheme, isn't it? Which is for testing, so you can observe its motion on film and all that
That's
sort of
right.
thing. All the test film you see is in the black and white checker.
Yeah.
So
and then Hergé got a bit carried away.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
With tinted.
Because it's a Scud, really, isn't it?
Yeah, basically.
The V2.
Yeah.
But is this a German colour scheme or a Farnborough coloured scheme?
Well, I think that's
a
both.
German one, isn't it?
It's a German colour scheme, but Farnborough have touched it up here and there when they had it in their care. But it's not totally original.
But it is the first man-made object to go into outer space.
The V2 is,
I mean, that is, regardless of the fact they're completely inaccurate and achieve very little.
Footage of there's footage the Americans took where they put a camera on one and up it goes and space and back down again. It's quite extraordinary. So Spitfire versus V1. We're going to take a break now. See you in a tick. Welcome back. We've just moved around from one sort of viewing area to another. We've got a clearer view of the V1 and the V2, although right next to us, and this isn't, I mean, you stopped in 1949, so we really shouldn't talk about this, but there's a Harrier jump jet. Is it a Sea Harrier or is it
it's a GR9.
GR9.
They saw two tours in Helmand before it came back.
Really?
So it's a really, pretty up-to-date piece of kit.
Before they were scrapped controversially, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we got this. The whole lot was sold to the US Marine Corps, except this one, which had suffered a break fire, and it was decided that it wasn't going to be sold because it'd be too much money for the US Marine Corps to repair it, and we got the opportunity to get it, so we snapped it quick. There you go.
Amazing. I mean, the heritage behind this is extraordinary.
Well, yes, because it's Sydney Cam, isn't it?
So he joins Hawker's. Is he involved with Sopwith? I can't remember.
Yeah,
he's a Sopwith first, and then
he's a First World War aircraft engineer,
and then he joins Hawker when Sopwith gets disbanded. Goes forcibly. No, they self-imposed bankruptcy. Because of post-war austerity and all this, right? And they reinvent themselves as Hawker, don't they?
Yeah.
After the First World War pilot Hawker.
Yeah.
And. And he joins them, and he's the chief designer by the end of the 1920s.
So project manager, really, and he goes all the way through to the Harrier.
So the Nimrod, the Hart, the Bulldog, all those things—they're all designed by him. Yeah. And of course, and the Hunter.
Yeah.
Hawker Hunter. That's Sydney Cam all the way up to the Harrier. Well, the first.
Yeah, I mean, it's
the first type of Harrier, which is called something completely different, and it's just momentarily gone out of my
flying
mind.
bedstead to start with, isn't there? And all those aircraft,
experiments.
Yeah, exactly, all those VTOL experimental aircraft, and yes, it's the Hawker Siddeley's something else at that point. I can never remember. It's a PR. Anyway, whatever.
That's not into that.
That's not what I want to talk about.
No, we want to talk about V2s.
Well, we touched on Dora earlier. Now, if listeners, if they don't know this, the V1 in particular was built in a concentration stroke labour camp at a called the Dora camp in Mittelbau, isn't it? Yeah, which is in southern eastern Germany, and it was a gypsum mine. So it's a mountain where they bored two parallel tunnels all the way through the mountain. The idea is the parts went in one end, and the V weapons then go full circuit. The V weapons would come out the other end, and they used Jewish slave labour in there.
Yep.
So when you go there, it's a very, very strange place. And I went there and with a survivor who took us round.
How amazing!
Who told us about what life was like there. And this very strange
thing.
Not
a lot of fun, I would imagine.
Not a lot of fun, and that perverse thing of. These are high-tech, cutting-edge weapons. They're training a workforce to be able to build these things and then working them to death. So you've this very, very strange, one of these. We've talked about this before. Nazi contradictions where you're building this very important weapon to your war effort. You've created a skilled workforce, and then you're not taking care of that workforce.
Mm-hmm. It's very odd.
And there are photographs of the galvanizing plant, for instance, in there where they're galvanizing the weapon so it will last, but the people doing the galvanizing have no protective gear on, so we're breathing the zinc fumes, and they're being killed by the process on this high-tech weapon that they're pinning their hopes on. And it's a very strange place, and there are these great long pools with parts of V1s in them, in the gloom, in the half light. And you see the cowl of the engine and the nose cone and the tail and the internal frame parts all lying around in this.
They're still there.
They're still there. Wow. Or at least they were 10, 15 years ago when I last went there. And it's a very strange place. And there's inevitably there's the camp crematorium in the middle. The gates where the entrance where you go.
Oh, it's just so horrible, isn't
it? It's horrible, and has this thing in the heart of it where they're killing the people they're training to build this thing. It just doesn't, like so many of these things
it makes no sense whatsoever.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
And of course, by this stage,
built in losing. Yes. You're building in losing into doing that.
It's ever decreasing circles, isn't
it? If you carry on like that, there's no way you can win.
No.
And it's a very strange place. And the thing with the V weapon, with both the V weapons, is in the end they cost more to make in human lives than they take.
Yes.
And more people are killed by the
process of manufacturing
than by the weapon itself. And the really interesting thing, of course, the V1, you've got that thing where you hear it coming and it's the fut. My dad remembers hiding under the kitchen table at his grandmother's house.
It's a sort of drone and it cuts out
in Putney, and then it cuts out, and because it's a pulse jet. The engine, isn't it? Is that right, John?
Yes.
You know much more about this than I do.
You're absolutely correct. It's a pulse jet engine, which is why it makes that constant pop, 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 pop sound.
Yeah.
And then when it cuts out, it goes into a dive, and then a few seconds later, you're going to hear an enormous explosion. So most people I've talked to who remember this were okay with it when they could hear it going pop, 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 pop.
Yes.
It's the point where it stops, then you think, And
I remember talking to Roland B. Beaumont, the sort of legendary fighter pilot, post-war test pilot, and he was one of the pioneers of how to get rid of these things, which was to fly it behind them in your Typhoon or Tempest and tip them over so that they fall in a field in Kent rather than in London.
Am I right in thinking they did one with a cockpit that?
Yeah, Hannah Reich test flew one. It was given a tentative V number. I think it might have even been V4 or V5.
Yeah.
And she test flew it, but it never went. The idea being that you would train your pilots just enough to be able to fly these things into their target.
Kamikaze weapon. I mean, the interesting thing is that these were separate projects. So the V1 was a Luftwaffe weapon. Am I right in thinking that? And the V2 was an army weapon. Is that right?
Yes. Also, but the SS take over all these special weapons, don't they? After the assassination attempt.
Yeah.
And the guy who's in charge is the kind of sort of the most unknown SS general of them all, which is Hans Kammler. There's only one known photograph of him in uniform, which is where he looks completely blurred. And no one knows what happens to him at the end of the war. It's just one of these sort of great mysteries. And he's doing all sorts of weird stuff going on as well. Because they're also searching for 0 point, this idea that you create a vacuum so that you have no gravity and all the rest of it. And there is reported films that they did it in a certain lab and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and of course it's all bollocks, but it's great fun to think about it. But Cameron, whatever happened to him, was he killed in the fighting somewhere in...
Swept up by paperclip by the Americans or the Russian equivalent.
Well, that's the key thing.
He's in a gulag. He's still in the gulag, soldering rockets together.
Gulag. He might be in Area 45 or whatever it's called. Or he might have been killed.
But the difference with these two things as a weapon, and the stuff you read, is that the V1, because you could hear it coming, it was upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
The V2 would just go off. You never heard it coming. It was supersonic. There'd just be this great big bang at the other end of the road, or on top of you.
Yeah.
And that was that. And in the morale reports, people with the V1, they don't like the V1. The British civilians don't like the V2. They're kind of like, oh well, whatever. If it happens, it happens. There's no point being scared of this, which is, I think, kind of amazing, because the British government, again, they're by late 1944, are really freaking out about...
Well, they don't quite know what to make of the V2. With the first few explosions, they use a cover story of major gas leak explosion.
Yeah, gas leak explosion. Yeah, because I live around the corner from Staveley Road, where the first one in Chiswick went off, and they said that was a gas explosion. But it would bury itself, wouldn't it? Because it's coming down at such a speed, so it actually did less damage than the V1.
The V1,
right?
yes.
In effect, because the V1 would come down, glide, and go off. So you kind of get an air blast out of it, whereas the V2 is coming down at hundreds of miles an hour, would bury itself into the ground and then explode. So you get the different effects of the different weapons.
I think the V1 could have been much more effective, I think the things like the 20 Committee and the British counterintelligence operation that meant that so many of the V1s landed in the wrong place was a great help.
It's double cross.
Double cross system was a great help to the British. And if we hadn't got that in place and hundreds more V1s had landed in central London, then the story might have been different.
Because we talked about this before, is why aren't they firing them at the Normandy beachhead?
It's because
they're idiots.
Because they're idiots, because Hitler's in charge, and he's just lost all...
Because you just think if you point every V1 that you've got at your disposal at the Normandy beachhead, you're going to really screw the landing up big time.
You'd have thought so, wouldn't you?
Because there's nothing...
First one's 13th of June, I think. It's 13th, 14th of June.
They sort of come to that realisation a bit later, don't they? Because a lot of the V weapons are dropped on Antwerp later in an attempt to close the docks.
Yes, there's that terrible tragedy in a cinema, isn't there, where hundreds of people killed in the cinema in Antwerp.
But Rommel is saying to Hitler before the invasion, let's get them out early and attack. And then once the invasion happens, he has this famous or infamous meeting with Hitler at Margeval in eastern France, and he says, mein Führer, let me turn the V1s on the beachhead, and Hitler says no. And then what's really weird is that evening Hitler is due on the 18th of June to then visit the Normandy beachhead, and what happens is a V1 gets misfired and lands about 4 miles away from where they are at Margeval, and he goes, do you know what, it's too dangerous around here, I'm going home. So he goes home. It's actually a few months ago, I went to see in Kent, in southeast London, part of Kent rather than Greater London, is the site of the last V1 V2 rather to land in Britain, and it was the last civilian casualty on home soil, which is a 34-year-old woman who was killed when this bomb came down and completely obliterated a house.
But they didn't do what they were meant to do, which was break British morale. So
no, and in fact, all that. Killed one person on that last one. It's a hell of a lot of effort for killing one person. There's easy ways to do it.
Well, there we go. Thanks for listening. As you could probably tell, this museum is a bottomless pit, so there'll be more of this. Cheerio.
Cheerio.